Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Podcast Network and presented in partnership with TrekCore.com. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on January 8th, 2021, and is current through the Star Trek Prodigy episode Kobayashi, which is what today's episode is all about, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a regular news show, bringing you the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. And this is a special supplemental episode featuring an interview done by myself and fellow TrekCore team member Jen Tift, who's also a regular guest on this show, with Aaron Waltke, co-executive producer on Star Trek Prodigy and one of the show's lead writers. He was also the credited writer for this past week's episode, Kobayashi, which we were excited to talk to him about. Yes, we're talking Kobayashi, the novel way the episode brings back legacy characters, what it means for our Star Trek Prodigy crew, and what to expect from the remainder of Star Trek Prodigy Season 1. There's a ton of really interesting stuff that Aaron had to tell us as part of this interview, including his own origin story with the Star Trek franchise. A transcript of this interview will also run at TrekCore.com, but without further ado, my and Jen's conversation with Aaron Waltke.
So, are we all ready?
Oh, are you doing an interview as well, Shaban?
I love this episode so much. My kids love this episode.
I'm glad that was the point. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's. I said this in my review, but I try to not react to the show, just so I could get their genuine reactions. But you made it so hard this week. Right. Because I'm gasping at every new little surprise that comes up.
Well, yeah, it's a tightrope walk, but not that difficult. We always, when we approach the story for any of these shows that the Hagemans and I have worked on, but especially this one, is we always try not to think of it as a show for kids or a show for adults, but a show for everyone. That sort of 4-quadrant type of storytelling that was very popular when I was
no
young.
pun intended from a Star Trek perspective,
yeah,
right?
I know.
4 quadrants.
Yeah. A 4-quadrant in multiple levels.
Right.
That was very popular in the sort of Amblin and Spielbergian kind of thing, where you had your Jurassic Parks and your Ghostbusters and your ETs, which had stuff that enthralled children, but also really mystified adults as well. And it was literally a shared storytelling experience. And that's something that I think we've always tried to strive for. This one was particularly tricky because we were trying to do a slightly more comedic episode, but also that one that had a lot of heart and an actual theme about what the spirit of Trek could mean to younger audiences. It was meta in that way, but very meta. Yeah. But I'm glad that you enjoyed it, and it seems like the response online has been really overwhelmingly positive. So it was a labor of love. I'm very glad that people are reacting that way.
Yeah, it really came across as a labor of love. Yes. And so once you decided to have the all-star bridge crew, how did you go about choosing which crew members you would have? What was that process like?
It was long, and ultimately it was what I will say is when we started, when we were in the room breaking with the other writers, there was this talk of okay, but yeah, really, what is the best bridge crew? And then, of course, everybody from the playgrounds to Star Trek conventions have had this argument over and over again. Who's the best engineer? Who's the best ops, whatever. And we tried. There was a lot of hardcore Trekkies, and we talked very long into the night about it, and we couldn't do it because there are so many permutations and so many this matchup with this would be great, but then these two work really well together. So ultimately we realized that was sort of a fool's errand to try to say this is the definitive best one. Right. But there were a lot of challenges and limitations and hoops that we had to jump through that did kind of start to narrow the window of who we would use. But ultimately we just made a list of our favorite characters and kind of started from there. There was different things like availability or, whether the lines that we wanted to use for the Kobayashi Maru, they would line up. Obviously there's episodes like Balance of Terror that are all about the neutral zone that we could borrow. from to help tell the story of what the Kobayashi Maru was, to like, if, because Savick wasn't pausing to say, what's the Kobayashi Maru, what's the neutral zone. So we had to kind of find ways to improvise around that. And the decision was made very early on. There was the talk of like, well, there's a lot of great Star Trek legacy characters that their actors sadly aren't with us anymore. And if we wanted to use them, would we just use the character and use a sound alike or something? And I think we decided, no, the point of this is to celebrate these actors, these characters, and the performances that they've created. In my heart of hearts, when I was writing this, and the reason I took on this rather large task of trying to source the right dialogue from 55 plus years of archives, was because I want this, in my heart of hearts, I hope this becomes sort of like, I've created a space for new audiences and young audiences to get a taste of Renee and Leonard and James's performances and their characters, and say, hey, where can I see more of this? Because their artistry was so incredible. I just wanted a chance, albeit briefly, to, if people are watching our show for the first time, say, hey, check out all these amazing other characters that you can see on the other Star Treks, and have that be one little springboard into experiencing that. So I know I'm going on, but this is a very long process.
Absolutely.
Then I think the number of bridge crew also was sort of a limiting factor, because in animation, for television, CG animation in particular, there is like a physical limit to the number of characters you could have on screen at the same time and have them look good. There's also limits to budget wise and pipeline wise, how many you can actually design for a single episode. So originally, I think I'd gone overboard and wrote like 9 characters, and they were like, we have to peel it back. And I do want to pause for a second and just give a huge shout out to our production crew and our directors and our artists and our editors and everybody that has worked on this episode with me. Because literally, like, when I pitched this idea, we all knew it was going to be an incredibly hard episode to make, like virtually impossible in just about any other show. But everybody basically agreed this is worth trying to do. So they all supported me, and I supported them, and I burned the midnight oil a lot trying to set them up for success. And I think I rewatched about 40 or 50 episodes top to bottom, and read about 90 Star Trek scripts, and did hours upon hours of Boolean searches of the archives. And then I'd go through and see if that was the right one, and then I'd hear, oh, he was picking up a glass or something, and I couldn't use the audio take, and or he would be saying it weird, or so everybody really kind of gave it their all and put in like a lot of extra effort to make this as good as it was. And I think in my mind, I'm always like, oh, we could have made it perfect. But just seeing the response today of how everyone sees the spirit of what we were doing and the tribute we were trying to accomplish, I'm really glad that it came across the way that it did. Anyway, back to the original question. So yeah, once we had whittled it down to, okay, we can make maybe 4 or 5 characters for this, we decided then, well, let's figure out like who would sit in, because sometimes we would say, oh, okay, so we love this character, and then we wound up with like 3 engineers. And so we can't, so
that'd be my bridge.
Yeah, so it was sort of like an evolving process of just sort of like, well, okay, that character we can't use because they're being used on a different show in a season or 2, or this character we can't use because they just don't have the right lines for this particular thing, or this character, it just kept it sort of organically started clicked together into this really interesting, almost Moneyball crew, like of characters you wouldn't expect to see together on the same bridge, but then you realize they are all they all are at the top of their game and know exactly what they're doing. if you ask me, I would argue that Odo, even though he never technically joined Starfleet, was probably one of the greatest security officers that's ever worked in any Star Trek show.
True.
You know, Worf is great, but I would say that Odo has caught more bad guys than Worf.
Ooh, that's a good thing to think about. Who caught the most baddies?
Yeah.
I'm gonna think about that one.
And you know, Uhura, I think it's just, even though in my opinion, I feel like her character really came into her own in the movies more than the TV show. She's such an iconic character. I think we wanted to honor that as well. And you know, and it thankfully Gates McFadden was available as our emissary from no pun intended, our emissary from Next Generation, to basically fill out the cast and also help sort of stitch some of the story together. And she had a really fun time doing it. She even improvised a few lines, I believe. She improvised the line, the degree of your stubbornness belongs in a medical textbook. Like, that was hers. And so, you know, it's one of those things where I think all told, I probably did maybe 8 or 9 drafts and variations of those particular scenes. And sometimes it would almost work, but then when you would cut it together, you know, these 2 lines, like that one line, especially a lot of Spock's dialogue, you know, for whatever reason, rights reasons or availability reasons, we couldn't use all of the movies, for instance. So I was sort of limited there. And also, you know, like, you'd be surprised how few times Spock actually says "live long and prosper." I think he only says it maybe 8 or 9 times in all of Star Trek, which is crazy to me.
Funny.
And it was just funny because I would go through and source each one and like, okay, Star Trek 4. And it would be like almost the performance that I was looking for. And then I literally went through every single time he said it through the entire 55 years of Star Trek. And it wasn't until I hit Star Trek 2009 that I heard him perform it. And I was like, yes, that's it. Thank God. That's the one I was looking for, that had that sort of that perfect Nimoy gravitas, but also you could tell that he really was saying farewell and good luck, you know, in a way that I think maybe his younger self, when he was just sort of tossing it off, wasn't thinking about. And you know, it was very hard to find the perfect crew, but I think that we found a great one. And you know, there's enough variation and flavor there, and you really do get the sense that as surprising as that matchup is, that Dal is the odd one out. and you know, they're working, you know, at full efficiency, and he's the one that's maybe the weak link in the chain. So
till the end, till the last round.
Absolutely.
He does pretty good.
Yeah, that's when I think he just goes so off the wall, the computer, for a moment, doesn't actually know what to do with him, and lets him get over to the Klingon ship.
Is that some foreshadowing for his command style in the future? Chaos. The only way through is chaos. You think it is?
Yeah, I think the unexpected, sort of the clever thief kind of turned good is that's probably something that he carries with him that could be sharpened into something that is like a tactician, you know, as somebody who comes at something from an outside the box angle. And I think that's something very Star Trek, is always just like be willing to accept those that with viewpoints or even approaches to life that are vastly different from your own. And I think that even means when you're dealing with like a scurrilous little wag like Dal, who you know, maybe has some rougher elements to his personality that he's slowly smoothing out as he's learning how to be okay with living in a found family, which I think is, you know, there's a lot of kids out there, I think, that do grow up in less than perfect homes and don't have that federation to take care of them. And, you know, it's a little bit like a shelter puppy. You have to let them kind of go through their growing pains before they become, you know, a true part of that family. So, I to answer, that's a long-winded way of saying, I think that is going to be part of his command style, you know, as he figures out his place in Starfleet or in the greater Federation. So.
Yeah, that's why it really means a lot to have Spock be the one to kind of like sign off on him as having this potential, and giving him the live long and prosper and telling him the needs of the many,
Yes.
And you mentioned finding the exact right, live long and prosper in Star Trek '09. And I was wondering, so you said there were some rights issues with the movie clips versus the TV clips, and
I can't
and how to
remember.
navigate that, and with the actors being deceased, was that a challenge too? Trying to did anyone have to sign off on that from the States or anything?
Yeah, well, my
like
I wasn't part of the legal department, but my understanding is that they did give their blessing, and all the T's were dotted and the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted, which I was very important to me. Because I was like, this was meant as a tribute, but I wanted everyone to be okay with it. As far as the rights for the movies go, I don't recall the exact legalities of it, but just to give you an idea of the scale, we started writing this episode in mid 2019, which was, if you recall, before Paramount and CBS had merged. So when we I think they had just pitched, or they had just dropped in the trades like, hey, we're thinking about merging. And like literally I have just broken the episode. It's like, and then it ends with him saying the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And then I was brought into a lawyer meeting like the next day that was like, okay, so we're trying to figure out like what from the movies you can and can't use. And I was like, oh, well.
Thanks for making my job harder.
Yeah, thankfully, and predictably it all worked out, and by the time the process was finished, I don't think we ever heard an eye batted from anyone. And then beyond that, it was more just like the raw audio from some movies for some scenes, I think, just for whatever reason wasn't available in the Star Trek archives. I think they only had the mixed or the final mastered versions. So that it's as you can imagine, sorting through that much raw media it's a little bit like the end of Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I do want to also give kudos to the people at the Star Trek archives who were putting up with my insane requests that always came with 15 exclamation points at the end, and this is utmost important, urgent. I need Spock to say transporter operational.
And it was nice. It was nice to see the Kelvin timeline represented with that little clip. And we also got he in one of his iterations, he said he gives a fire everything, the Nero line, which is like awesome. I'm like,
yeah, there's a little bit of Nero in there. I think when he's playing the music that is not Thunderstruck by AC/DC,
I noticed that,
inspired by but legally distinct.
It's the 24th century cover, right?
Here, I'll give you an exclusive. I don't think Nami will mind this. The name of that song, which I got to name when we were doing the final mix, as you'll see when the soundtrack comes out, is Lightning Boom.
Perfect.
Yes. So
nice and legal.
Yeah, nice and legal, legally distinct. But it's so good because when we first did the mix, it's like, how did you get AC/DC? And we're like, that's Nami Millimod, my friend. That's not. But we did. I mean, but it was definitely meant as a nod. I initially wrote it in as a nod to one of my favorite moments, of course, in Star Trek: First Contact, when he's Zefram Cochrane is about to launch the Phoenix, and he's like, wait, and he pulls out classical music and puts in Magic Carpet Ride.
Yep.
And then of course it was sort of a double reference too, because then of course in the JJ movies they play the Beastie Boys as well during the fight. So there's just something quite fun, and I think it was Insurrection as well, when they have to, or was it was Insurrection when they had to play Gilbert and Sullivan to bring Data down. There's
a soaring soul.
Yes, there's a long and storied history of weaponizing popular music in starships.
I love it.
But yeah, it was really crazy experience to put together, but it was also very fun too.
Wonderful. Yeah, and there's a lot more important things happening in this episode besides the actual Kobayashi or
That's
Maru
true. Yes.
test. You can spread it out a little bit. You just threw a lot at us here. And we have the 17 years ago scene, and we have Captain Chakotay of the USS Protostar, and it seems to be a lot of temporal
yes,
shenanigans.
Yeah,
there's only so much I can say without it being spoilery, but I think most Star Trek fans are smart enough to have figured out that this is not the first time that an odd timeline has shown up in a Star Trek continuity. And usually there's a pretty obvious explanation for that. And you do hear Chakotay in the end in his message. This is in the episode where he says, that there's an anomaly and they're being boarded. So that's sort of like a little hint that, something has gone awry in the events prior to the starship arriving on Tars Lamora, the Protostar. So as far as like when that happened and how it wound up in Tars Lamora, that is kind of like I all I can say is let me remind you, we are only 5 episodes into the show. So
on the Chakotay thing, sort of non-spoilery, I wonder if you could reflect on, obviously now we've had hologram Janeway, which is a version of Janeway, and we've had hologram Odo and hologram Uhura and Scotty, and they're sort of versions of those original characters. But what's it like now starting to get your hands around? Obviously, we've only just had one short clip of him, but what's it like now getting your hands around the actual characters themselves that you're starting to build new story for?
Yeah, it's so funny answering that question, as I'm the co-head writer of the 2nd season now, and again, I can't say anything beyond just what has already been said, which is there are more legacy characters coming.
Sure.
But so Chakotay, I think the character, I think, was always an interesting one that had a lot of potential that I think was left even unexplored in Voyager. So I think that the chance to work with that character and breathe life into him again and give him sort of a more resounding purpose in the post Voyager space, it has been I think redemptive might be a little bit of a broad word and maybe a little over a highfalutin word for it, but it has been nice to be given the chance to give a lot of these characters sort of like a second journey that is meaningful, I think, to even the people portraying them. And that goes for Kate Mulgrew as well, who has been very supportive of everything we've been doing. She came on board, I think, initially saying, "Oh, this will be fun." And then now she comes to us constantly saying, "This is incredible," which, to hear that from Captain Janeway herself is, I'm from Bloomington, Indiana, or my family is.
Oh.
And so, and when I was going to Indiana University at the time, Lee Sheldon, who was a writer for Next Generation, was teaching there, and the Lilly Library had just had all of Jerry Taylor's effects donated. She donated everything there, so I literally learned how to write screenplays by reading her personal drafts with the annotations of Voyager scripts and stuff. So I kind of grew up with visiting my grandparents next to where Janeway was supposed to be born. So basically it felt,
and there's the statue there now.
Yes, I was the first to donate to that Kickstarter. I will.
Very nice. I was not the first, but I was one of them.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Bloomington Unitarian Church has a very, very big Trekkie contingency. And like one of my professors regularly sends me updates. It's like, look, you have some Christmas carols sung in Klingonese.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's so I mean, and my dad is a Trekkie through and through. He was one of those guys that in college, I think especially, he watched all them in syndication. My exposure to TOS growing up was I was sort of a latchkey kid, and my parents would kind of dump me at my aunt's house, who in turn, she was busy with stuff. So they just plop me down in front of the television and turn on PBS thinking it would be educational. But then in the afternoons, PBS would show the original series.
Sure.
And so I would just be there enthralled, just watching, people, doing Caliphie death matches and
hoping she wouldn't enter the room, right?
Yeah. And it was an incredible sort of, I guess, exposure to all these crazy new ideas and science fiction and elsewhere, that I'm very glad that I had that, in addition to just coming home every day after school and seeing Next Generation and Deep Space Nine in syndication on my local Fox affiliate. So I got to basically binge watch Deep Space Nine during a time when they didn't have a word for that. So basically all the criticism of like, every story's connected and I have to wait a week to see the next one, I just missed all that. I was like, what are you talking about? I just come every day. It's the best story ever. Anyway, that was a diversion, but I just thought I'd share.
No, that's really interesting. And like, I don't know if you have any personal favorites from Star Trek that you'd like to share, and how that influences your writing on Prodigy.
Yeah, I think the 2 episodes I always come back to are, Deep Space Nine. I think I've come around to just really appreciating the character work on that the most. I think especially Odo and Quark's relationship, and Garak, and all of these sort of morally gray characters sort of sifting their way into what could be considered morally good, or doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. That always meant a lot to me. But the 2 episodes that come to mind that I dreamt about and thought about for ages and ages were Elementary, My Dear Data, with I think with the and its companion, was it Ship in a Bottle?
Ship in a Bottle. Yeah.
Those 2 episodes to me as a child were very formative, because it was like, it was challenging me to say, hey, what if your video games became real and demanded rights? and I didn't know how to do that. And I was like, well, Moriarty should have rights. He should get out. And it devastated me when he didn't at the end. And it made me really, to this day, I want to write an episode where Moriarty gets out and helps the crew or whatever. And the other one I think was, and I was probably the start of my deep and abiding love of time travel, was Time's Arrow. That 2-parter really, really warped my brain. Where I was just like, but Data's head is 500 years old, and they just put it back on. And
I mean, it does feel like, this whole protostar 17 years in the past thing, there is a whole kind of, it evokes in my mind similar echoes of Data's head living under San Francisco.
Yeah, I can't help it. I'm almost certainly that is subconsciously influenced. Like, no, this is totally Star Trek because it's my favorite Star Trek.
Right.
All right, I got one. So one question I have is, yesterday, and it's just a hypothetical question of just like, what would you like to see? But yesterday I noticed the Viacom CBS Vice President for Consumer Products talked about how there's going to be this big merchandising push around Prodigy, and Playmates obviously coming back and doing toys again, which there's probably 50 Playmates toys on the shelves behind me. Hypothetically, Playmates comes to you and says, Aaron, we'll make you anything you want from Prodigy, and we'll make it for you. What is the thing that's at the top of your list that you want Playmates to make as a Prodigy toy, whatever? It can be as of like obvious or esoteric as you want it to be.
I mean, it's funny because this is not as theoretical as a question. But I mean, it's tricky because like all my answers are backed way behind NDAs. But suffice to say, ships. I really want ships, and I know that ships will eventually come. They're going to do the action figures are probably at the forefront, and they look great. I will say I've seen the prototypes; they're amazing. So don't you worry, they're coming, and they're going to be I hesitate to say so, but they're going to look way better than these collector's editions. Back in the day.
Yeah, they were really phoning it in with the bigger stuff by the end.
I think I still hold on 1 second. Let me see.
I'll tell you what though, a 4.5-inch Captain Picard Playmates action figure, the like first one they did in '92, that is still one of the best likenesses of Patrick Stewart that anybody has done in toy
you're
form.
right. They did some really good ones. Yeah. This one's my favorite though. I don't know if you can see.
Oh yeah.
All good things.
Yep, love it.
Picard.
Here I got right here. I got the old grumpy Admiral Riker. There he is.
But yeah, I mean, I think that there's a number of characters that I think people will be very excited to see as action figures. But I mean, ships, man, like ships are my jam. I love. So I'm hoping at some point Eagle Moss or someone like that could also, I'm curious if they'll get the variable geometry.
Yeah, right.
Maybe 2 different versions. I don't know.
Well, Playmates did that with the Voyager. They did.
Oh, they did.
The nacelles went up and down.
Yeah, I will say ours is a little more complicated.
Yes, it is. Yeah, fair point.
Yeah.
Although I just got they did this All Good Things Enterprise, which turned into the regular Enterprise, where the third nacelle kind of tucked away inside of the ship, and the like little guns on the side kind of folded in. So it's all possible.
Oh, sure. My grandfather was a tool and die model maker, so I'm sure there's some engineer out there who's already figuring out the specifics of how to get the trifoil third nacelle to open up perfectly again. But no, I'm very excited. I think that especially, I don't know if you've seen the toy aisle lately, but there are toys out there that do crazy stuff. And, obviously the first generation might even of these toys might be standard, but they might even have some cool bells and whistles that would have blown me away as a kid. So I hope everybody's excited because they are coming.
Yeah, I feel that when I look at some of my kids' toys. I've got 3 kids, and some of them are just outrageous. Just the technology on them, and the design is just so much above what we had when we were little. So I'm really looking forward to see what they do with Prodigy, with the characters and everything. But
yeah, for sure.
Man.
But yeah, as far as the 17 years and the Chakotay of it all, I think this was kind of an interesting episode because it was in many ways a repilot, which because the first 5 episodes, because they are 22 minutes, and even the first 2 are basically connected together into a 44-minute, they are kind of a single storytelling unit. And if you watch them all together, it's basically a 2-hour movie, and it ends with okay, we got away from the bad guy, and now we have this ship, and now what's our future? And I think it was an interesting, fun challenge, but something I've always loved on any TV show I've written on. It's always been really fun to me. It's give me the ones that are just like the scraps. Give me the ones that are the little moments, because and I think Mike McMahon's talked about this too, is some of his favorite moments in TNG weren't the big high concept sci-fi craziness. They were the moments where somebody was just in 10 forward, having soup and talking about it's green, and it's I love that I got to do that a little bit in this episode with Gwen and Zero, because I feel like their relationship was something I really wanted to explore, especially with Zero, who is someone who is, I think, in an abstract sense, perhaps neuroatypical, and Gwen, who's someone I think is justifiably dealing with, if not depression, then at least trauma, and finding a way where together, their sort of different perspectives are helping to inform and lift each other up, and fill in each other's weaknesses and becoming each other's strengths, which I think is Trek at its core. Absolutely. In my opinion.
Yeah, I think they made an interesting pair. I like that you're pairing the different characters together, and I really like what you said, that you're paying attention to the individual arc of each character, because they're all dealing with different types of trauma, which I appreciate as a parent and as a former child with my own trauma. I'm wondering if their personal arcs are planned, how planned they are in advance, what I mean, throughout the first season or the second season, or do you have a complete character? Do you know what they're doing in the future?
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
So I can break down a little bit of how we tend to break it break the seasons in the story of on Tales of Arcadia, which the Hagemans and I originated together. Like I started as just a staff writer, and they were the story editors, and then by the end of it, they had moved on to making movies and stuff, and then I became the showrunner on the final installment. But the way we always broke Tales of Arcadia, and very much how we broke this series, was we did sort of a light serialization where each episode has its own sort of identity and sort of a beginning, middle, and end, or a character arc, but there's an ongoing sort of mission or story or want or need that we kind of broke up into like many little seasons. So I think in Troll Hunters, for instance, we had a 13 episode sort of segments, and in Star Trek Prodigy we have 10 episode sort of story arcs, and in each story arc we would then say, okay, what's the midpoint, what are they going to, where do they start as characters, where do we see them ending up at the end of the series, what's their first goalpost for that character growth by the end of this season. And it was just constantly kind of talking about like, okay, how can we make sure that each character is different and have their own kind of personality and their own sort of shortcomings, but also things that they might like to learn on the natural promise of this television premise of, they're kids with a starship, but they also are finding purpose and meaning and working together and scientific curiosity and exploration, while also defending sort of freedom and exploring their individuality in ways that maybe they never had the opportunity to before. And that from there, that's how we organically arrived at ideas like, oh, what if Rock Talk was always sort of perceived as this big sort of hulking behemoth that everyone assumed would be the security officer, but actually has an interest in animals and xenobiology and science. What if Zero is someone that everyone always kind of, which, if I'm being honest, is in truth, what is it? How do you say it? Is it in truth? Is there no beauty? Is that the?
Yeah.
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
Is there in truth?
Is there in truth?
Is there in truth no beauty? I feel like they were very judgy of how they describe Medusans in that episode. They're always like, "Oh, they're the most hideous things you've ever seen." Oh, come on, they'll drive you mad. And then if most of the episode was just people just saying, oh, but perhaps madness is its own beauty. And it's like, well, or maybe they're just interesting to look at. But I understand that was sort of 1960s speak. Yeah. But for a character to kind of like through that lens, like Zero, who they were sort of perceived as this weapon or what have you, and seen purely for what the effect they have on others, but someone who is also empathic and telepathic, and literally it was an interesting conundrum there that with the character of Kolos, you only kind of understand it secondhand. Kolos never is really given a voice, but with Zero, it was a chance to explore that and of someone who hears everyone else's emotions and thoughts and feelings and corporeal desires, but maybe can't participate in that until they find a way to kind of change themselves by creating a space in which they can grow as beings, corporeal and not. It was always kind of finding little nuances of that worked both in a physical metaphor and in an emotional one, and then seeing how they might slowly kind of cohere together, and as I said, fill in each other's vacancies in a way that felt organic and natural. So again, very long answer to the question of I think we were thinking very deeply about what are some surprises that we can have for these characters, and what are some good messages that we could have ultimately with any story of self-discovery.
And related to something you said earlier about kind of pulling on kind of little moments or little ideas from, Star Trek, both established canon, and then also some of the kind of, there's also this kind of universe of licensed tie-in works. And I mean, there's obviously some, at least one very big idea sort of borrowed from the New Frontier novels in Rock Talk being a Brickar. Is that something when you're, when you're sort of when you're looking at this tapestry of Star Trek and thinking about what are ideas that maybe we're interested in exploring further or pulling from, do you think about that kind of wider license tie-in universe in addition to what's seen on screen?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's something where, and David Mack obviously was very helpful in the first season as we were trying to get our bearings as far as like what's possible, what's not, what's out there, what have people already been thinking about for the past 50 years. And the short answer is, you know, whenever we are kind of saying like, okay, we know up to a point, this is how something works. And then beyond that, inevitably, there's been 5 novels that have also explored that, or fan canon, or comic books, or whatever. So then we can kind of pick and choose our lane as far as like what we think is like, oh, that, you know, if it's already a good idea, we don't feel any reason to negate beta canon. Yeah. You know, if anything, we would rather just take that and build on it and say, hey, thank you. That's a great idea. Let's work together and see if that we can have that connect in. You know, I think that it's a little bit like Star Wars too, in that, you know, you the beta canon and the alpha canon, obviously the screen canon has to take precedence, but I don't think we've ever actively just said, you know what, screw what the books say. You know, if they have a good idea, we'll happily try to incorporate them. Like the Brickar are a very fun idea, and I think that's why when we were trying to find like what are alien species that take advantage of this animated medium that I think would have been hard to accomplish in just people with wrinkles on their foreheads era of Star Trek, that it immediately came to us as like that would be really interesting to explore, you know, and you'll find we keep doing that even when you know, wherever we can, if everyone has unanimously agreed that one of the Vulcan gods that they kind of allude to here there has a name, and we have an option to drop it, then we'll probably drop the name that has been used in the books but never mentioned in alpha canon, because why not, right? Right.
Well, presumably also, I mean, given the history of every other Star Trek show, at some point, eventually, there will also be Prodigy comic books and stories and licensed tie-in as well that eventually someone else in the future will look at and want to draw from as they're making new Star Trek.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can't promise that everything we write is going to perfectly be the adverse and not negate stuff that's in beta canon, because I'll be honest, I have not read every single Star Trek book that's ever come out.
Nor should you. A lot of them are not very good.
It's a lot. But you know, that's wherever possible, we always, you know, if we come across a great idea that is explored in beta canon, we will use it. A great example even is in the Kobayashi Maru episode that we wrote. You know, as much hullabaloo as there's been made about the Kobayashi Maru and mystique around it in the Star Trek fandom, there's actually not that much in what the rules actually are. Most of that has been fleshed out just in headcanons and in the novels and stuff. So I did have questions. They're like, well, what if the person just refuses to participate? And sure enough, there are a number of novels that say, like as you said, with Sulu, he refused to participate, and then they threaten to mutiny. So you actually see that in episode 106 when Uhura and Odo threatened to resign their commissions. And so it was really
Jacob
fun
loved that idea. That was so fun.
Yes, he was like, so yeah, that it actually was very helpful, I think, in framing my mind, and like that was my instinct. But I was like, am I crazy? And then sure enough, see that, you know, 30 years of other Star Trek fans have arrived at the same conclusion, and it's like, well, we can't all be wrong, right?
Doesn't wear a hive mind like the Medusans.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Oh yeah, that I will say that is my contribution to
that was my next question.
Star Trek canon. I was like, the Medusans exist in a hive mind.
Can you tell me more about that? About how you decided that?
I think it kind of, so in the early days when we were kind of building out a lot of these lores of alien races, either established or new, like the Vauna-Kot, you know, everybody in the writers' room had some very strong contributions. I do recall in terms of just the very basic ground rules of like, what is Vaunacott society, at least when it was around, or what is the Medusan hive mind, and whatnot. Shauna Benson and myself, I think, kind of like we're very much in that kind of world building kind of phase in those first couple weeks, I remember. So like the Medusan hive mind in my mind is like, well, they're the non-corporeal creatures that are also telepathic. So it felt very, in my mind, it no pun intended, it felt like very organic to think that they would be a bit of a collective, not unlike the Borg or the Dominion, but I picture them as being a little bit more retaining perhaps their individuality, unlike whereas I feel like changelings seem to prize just becoming part of the whole, and Borg are sort of like, you have no identity. There is only the will of the Borg Queen. Whereas I in my mind, the it's a little bit more holistic, maybe a little more like a hippie commune in a way, if they're sort of floating, flashing,
the psychedelic colors
clouds.
And
yes. That's in my mind, but I don't know how much further I can go beyond without getting into spoilers, but yeah, that's
interesting too.
In my mind, that's what a Medusan hive mind is.
Yeah, my kids call him Siri sometimes because he has the same circle. He
does have that little circle.
He has got that look to him. So it's kind of like an internet. They're in like their own little network of Medusans.
Yeah, Z does have that. It's really great.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And then there's Murph. My kids love Murph, of course. Everybody loves Murph. Were you prepared for that?
Yeah, the story of Murph is so fun because I think when the first week when we were brought on, like the Hagemans used to refer to me as like their employee number one, because we had worked together on Troll Hunters and stuff, and while Chad Quant and myself were show running on Wizards, their office was literally right next door to ours on the DreamWorks animation lot, and they were writing the Troll Hunters movie. And so I remember they would sometimes pop in as like, hey, we just had a meeting at Secret Hideout and they want us to pitch a Star Trek show. And then I was like, well, I love Star Trek. And then maybe you should make that character a hologram. And then sure enough, they came back. It's like, okay, so Nick bought the show. So now we have to make it. Do you want to work on it with us? And I was like, yes, I do. And so it was funny because like week one, they came in and they just had these pictures of like, here's Rock Talk, she's big. Here's Zero, they're a non-corporeal Medusan being. And pictures and we were like, well, so who are they? And they were like, we don't know yet.
That's your job now.
Right.
Yes.
You tell us.
but it was actually really nice to be let in that early in the process, because I think they had written the pilot, but if you recall, the pilot, most of it is in this sort of almost surreal, nobody can talk to each other space. And so there was the first draft, and so a lot of it was just kind of like a survival adventure that was focused really on Dal and Gwen. So a lot of the pieces hadn't totally come together yet, as they did especially once we brought Ben on board and we started to figure out the visual language and style of it too, in the writer's room, and started developing it. So, but Murph was not in that first draft, and I remember, we were trying to find ways to infuse some. For lack of a better word, joy. There was optimism, but it did start, and it's still there. It's a very hopeless place, and we were like, we were trying to find ways to make Dal's adventure fun, but also in that sort of, I guess, sort of cocksure kind of like adventure-y kind of story. And I remember there's at one point, and you kind of get a little hint of it but we did, at one point in the pilot, we had suggested we have Dal doesn't make it back right away, and they're like, well, we have to find a replacement. And then he comes back and there's Murph sitting in his chair and there's just like some rando, and he's like, you replaced me? And
Bob.
Yeah, and we were like, well, what should this rando B, is he a one-off? And then we were like, what if it's just like literally just like a slug? and then it made us all laugh so much. But then as we actually started to actually kind of explore, it's like, what if they had this thing where they're not sure if he's a crewmate or if he's a pet, and they're not sure if he's the most intelligent being in the world or literally just a slug, like you. And it became this enigma, and it became a running joke that the Murph was the key to everything. But the more we played with it, the more we realized that it was an easy way to it was sort of like a missing component in a way, because it gave Rock someone to focus her love of animals with, and also it gave anytime a scene got a little too serious, you could just have Murph is eating the chair. And sure enough, kids love Murph, and we love Murph, and I'm glad that I will give extreme kudos to the Hagemans for not being precious enough to say, hey, we can't just add a new character. Like, in fact, they immediately, as soon as the room pitched it, they were like, this is funny, this is really good, like we needed something like this. And we started working Murph into the rest of the show from there on forward. And I think you'll be surprised even the places that Murph goes. So
yeah, I mean, we've seen him save the day, didn't he sat on the right button. I don't think that was an accident. And I'm not sure what the eating the photon grenades meant, but
I think he was just hungry. Or maybe he had some secret ulterior motive. Who knows?
Will we find out the origins of Murph?
Gosh, will we find out the origins of Murph? Does Murph have origins, or was it Murph always was?
Ooh.
I don't know.
Star stuff.
I mean, you will find out what Murph is. I'll say that.
Oh, good. Okay.
And I think I tweeted that a month or two ago, and people kind of lost their minds a little bit.
Yes, there were lots of theories.
I know. I will officially say, of all of the, I think now thousands of guesses that I've seen, there was one person who got it right, but I won't say who.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
But I stand by it as probably the most obscure reference we possibly could have made.
But it is a reference. It is.
It has happened it has been mentioned in another Star Trek show.
Oh man, it gives me a lot to think about.
Sure.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for everything, and thank you so much for so much time today. We really appreciate it.
This has been a pleasure, and I'm glad to have finally met you both.
Yeah, and hopefully maybe Mission Chicago, or a Star Trek convention in the not too distant future, we'll get the opportunity to say hello in person.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah. And if you ever want to have me back, just let me know. And if I can make work my schedule, I'm happy to chat. So
absolutely, so for sure. Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you again for the episode. It's really terrific. Yes. And I'm pleased that so many people are enjoying it so much as Jen and I did when we had the chance to watch it the first time.
I'm so glad as well, because it was very hard to make.
Sure.
I have to get another Emmy.
maybe, yes.
This could do it.